Hey guys, Pentless here. I'm currently the rank 1 jungler in North America and I've held the position for around the past 2 or 3 months. And today I'm going to be doing a comprehensive jungle guide about everything I know about jungle from my 10,000 hours of playing jungle. This guide will cover everything from the basic foundations of how to play jungle to some more advanced concepts tailored to higher elo players. In this guide, I'll start out simple with the basics of jungling, and as the video progresses on and on, the concepts will get increasingly more complicated, and by the end of it, you'll get to know basically everything that I know about jungle. So yeah, I think this is going to be a long video. I don't know how long this is going to be, but strap in and welcome to the comprehensive jungle guide. In the early game of League of Legends, there are four main actions that junglers can do. The first sense that junglers can do is farming, which is just farming your camps one after another. A lot of junglers a lot of junglers in this region tend to want to finish a full rotation of their camps before they do all of the rest. But I don't necessarily agree with the opinion, but I'll talk more about it later on in the video. The second thing a jungler can do is gank a lane, right? In the early game, a jungler can gank bot, gank mid, gank top with the aim of either getting a kill or getting a summoner spell. Either way, ganking is one of the most impactful things a jungler can do in early game in League of Legends. The next thing a jungler can do is invade the enemy jungler, right? This is what happens when the jungler goes to the enemy side of the jungle. So for example, the red side jungler, let's say the enemy jungler starts blue, and the red side jungler actually starts the enemy's raptors. And what the red side jungler will do is he'll take raptors, red, and Krugs, and basically that's what we call invade, because assuming the blue jungler takes blue grump wolves, once the blue jungler comes here and realizes all his bot camps are gone, a lot of them will begin to panic and make some bad plays. Meanwhile, you're basically up 3 camps and you get to farm more camps than enemy jungler by invading the enemy jungler. And the last thing a jungler is responsible for doing early game is the two objectives, right? Currently in League of Legends and early game we have Dragon and Grubs. And yeah, normally these two objectives get traded, but if you are extremely ahead of the enemy jungler, or if the enemy jungler makes a mistake, there's a possibility to get both dragons and grubs and Rift Herald early on in the game. So what should you be doing as a jungler in the game? Well, it really depends on what type of jungler you're playing, right? Some junglers really excel at farming. Junglers like Zed or Phil6 have an extremely fast full clear, under 3 minutes and 10 seconds. So if your main thing is, if your jungler is really good at hitting camps quickly, or as much as possible, you should be looking to hit many camps basically as possible in order to gain time lead over the enemy jungler. The next thing, if you're playing ganking jungler similarly, you're going to want to aim to drop camps and basically try to get leads in your lanes, right? For example, the main champion I play, Nunu, is extremely good at ganking, so there's a lot of the times I would just go red Raptor's Gromp, ignore basically half my jungle in order to get a good gank off of bot lane, and this can really impact bot lane. But again, this is only because I'm playing Nunu, and Nunu is extremely good at ganking. Similarly, there's a class of junglers that are really good at evading, which are the class of junglers that can fight early. Graves, Kindred, Bel'Veth are the 3 junglers that come predominantly in mind, but there's other junglers that really excel at invading. The thing about these invading junglers is that these invading junglers are extremely good level 1 to level 2, and in the early game, they can basically fight off any other junglers from their camps, right? So if you're stronger than the enemy jungle, the enemy jungler either has to fight you and die, or the enemy jungler has to wait for their lanes to basically help them defend their camps, right? But either way, if you're playing a really good invading jungler, you should be aiming to get more and more invades. However, in this current meta, I don't think there's many good invading junglers. And last but not least, there are some junglers that are pretty good at taking objectives, right? Nunu is one of them, since he basically stays perfectly healthy when taking dragon or grubs. But there's also other champions like Shyvana. Shyvana has extremely high damage dragon, so a lot of common things that Shyvana players do is that they'll take the dragon the moment it spawns, because Shyvana can clear pretty fast, and also do the dragon pretty fast when it spawns. So yeah, depending on what type of jungler you're playing, you should be aiming to basically prioritize your strength in the jungle, right? A ganking jungler should gank more than a farming jungler. A farming jungler should farm more than a ganking jungler. And invading jungler should be invading more than farming and ganking junglers. You get the idea, right? You should be playing to your strengths based on the champion that you're playing jungle. I'll dive into all of these concepts later on, but this is the main four things that you should be thinking about in the early game. You should be thinking about whether you should be farming, ganking, invading, or doing objectives on the map. Jungle is truly a role where every single second matters, right? If you can get to a gank 10 seconds early, or if you can finish your full clear 10 seconds early, you can go help self vision so that you can basically have more actions on the map. However, in lower elos, a lot of junglers do not know how to effectively clear their camps, right? I would say the most important skill as a jungler is knowing how to full clear before 330, and generally knowing how to clear your camps no matter what jungler you're playing. Now, there's over 40 junglers in the game, so I can't basically go over the full clear of each jungler. But depending on which jungler you're playing, let's say that you're playing Gwen, one effective way to learn how to do your first full clear on Gwen is just search up Gwen full clear, and you should see a few videos like this, which shows off the Gwen's full clear, which is like 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Now, a lot of these times, these videos will be a bit complex, and don't worry if you're even like, let's say 10 seconds slower than full clear. The most important breakpoint for a jungler is knowing how to full clear before the 3 minutes and 30 seconds mark, as the skull crab spawns in 30 minutes at the 30 minute mark, and it's important that you can make it there on time. Now, I can't show you everything, every single full clear. You can look up yourself, but I'll show you some of the basically fundamental concepts about how to clear camps effectively and save time while playing jungle. Now, there's a couple of things that you have to be aware of when you're clearing the jungle, right? So let's say you're playing Pantheon and you're just hitting the camps, right? For jungle, you really want to drag the camp out to where you're pathing next, right? So right now, in my mind, I want to get to Krug's camp as my next camp as fast as possible. So I'll be dragging the camp over to Krug's, so that this way I will have to walk less distance from red to Krug's, and that saves me around 2 seconds for each clear, right? Each jungle monster has a patience bar, and ideally, if you were a very good jungler camp or jungle player, you'll learn how to use the patience bar to its fullest, so that the jungle camps, so that you can drag the jungle camps as far as possible while you're clearing, right? So I can do an example on this blue, right? You can see the patience bar above the camp, and whenever it goes out of the circle, it turns yellow, right? And whenever it goes back in the circle, it turns back to white. If you stand outside of the circle for too long, the jungle camp will basically lose interest in you and go back to its natural position healing up. This is what we call a reset. Normally, resets are really bad, so you want to avoid doing this as much as possible. However, you would still want to leash the camp towards the next location you're going as far as humanly possible, right? So one common example I will see is that if I'm doing Gromp, right, I will start hitting it, everything will be normal, and notice how I'm dragging this camp out, right, almost as far as possible. And when I think I can basically kill the camp with enough auto attacks, I drag the camp out so the patience bar almost runs out, and this basically gives me more distance to go to Wolf's camp, right? Another concept about playing junglers is that some junglers have unique aspects to this clear. For example, the jungler that I'm currently playing right now, Pantheon, does more damage to enemies who are below 20% health. Now, you want to use this to your advantage, right? You want to basically throw a Q out when the jungle camp is below 20% health in order to maximize the damage. So notice I'm not queuing now, but I'm doing one more auto attack to Q so that it gets the enhanced damage. There are some junglers that function like that. I know Kindred E is a spell that works similar to that. You don't want to just cast it at the beginning of doing a camp. You want to cast it when the camp is low to basically maximize the execute damage. Finally, the last general concept about clearing is that some junglers can do this technique where you're basically doing 2 camps at once, right? Pantheon's Q is an ability that can hit multiple targets at the same time. What this means is that if I drag the camp far enough from blue to Gromp, I can basically hit both of them with a single Q. which basically maximizes my damage to both of them. So notice how I drank the blue buff out, I Q, and I managed to land the Q both on the Gromp and the blue buff. Although this doesn't look like it saves much time, when you're playing jungle, every second truly does matter, and micro optimizations like this are pretty effective if you want to become a good jungler, right? As a League of Legends player, you're not expected to know every champion in the game, but even if you say you play 5 jungle champions or something, you should know every single little detail about how to optimize a full clear, and basically aim to get full clear below 330 by using the techniques I just listed. As a jungler, you have access to one of the most important tools in the game, which is your smite. This smite is basically very useful in order to secure dragons, grubs, rift herald, any objective on a map, because it does a lot of damage depending on the stage of the game to these objectives. And in League of Legends, whoever gets the last hit on the objective gets the whole objective. It doesn't matter if the enemy team does 90% of the damage. As long as you get the last hit, you get the entire objective. So, based on how many treats you have left in your jungle pet, if you just spawn in the game and have more than 20 treats left in your jungle pet, your smite would do a base of 600 damage to any objective, and you cannot use your smite on enemies just yet, once you have 40 stacks. However, once you stack it up to 20, you'll notice that your smite upgrades, and your smite can now do a solid 40 true damage to enemy. Now, honestly, not many people care about 40 true damage, right? Ignite does like 5 times the damage of this. But the most important part about this ability is that it slows by 20% for 2 seconds, right? So you can basically, if you're chasing somebody, you can press smite on them for a little bit of damage, 40%, but you can also slow them for 20% and it allows you to catch up with them a lot more, right? Similarly, at this point of the game, your smite would do a total of 900 damage to objective, which is a decent amount. And finally, once you fully stack your jungle item treat, your smite now upgrades again into doing 1200 damage. It still does the same stuff to enemy champions, but now against objectives, you now do 1200 damage to objectives. Now, how do you use these smites on the objectives, right? Normally in a game of League of Legends, as a jungler, you want to be saving smite to basically secure the objective as fast as possible, right? So, let's say the objective is getting low, and ideally you want to smite as soon as the objective turns below 1200 HP to basically deny the enemy jungler a chance of smiting the objective. Now, this is the base level of jungling, right? I think this is like expected for silver and below players, but there is another level of this mining capacity, right? Every jungle champion has some ability that does some damage to the dragons, right? For example, Nunu Q is at max rank will do, I believe, 1200 damage to objectives if I just find the level up button correctly. And if you combine this with your smite, you can basically sum up the two amount of damages to do like a bigger secure, right? So although normally you'd be only able to secure this dragon at 1200 HP, if you basically save your Q on Nunu or your most damaging ability, you can get the dragon below 2400 LP, 2400 HP, and at the same time as pressing your smite, you want to press Q and smite in order to do 2400 damage to objectives. Now, Nunu is an extreme case of this, but this also applies to other champions, right? Whatever your most damaging ability, you want to see how much damage it does to objective and time it with your smite at the same time. This makes it harder for the enemy jungler to secure a smite seal on you, right? Some junglers do more damage with their abilities, like Nunu is an outlier, does 1200 damage. If you're playing Maokai jungle, you might be doing a bit less. I'd say it's around like 400 damage. Similar with Pantheon, it's like 400 damage. But the main takeaway is that if you want to secure an objective, you want to use your highest damaging ability with your smite at the same time. Now, there is like a basically hierarchy of how well each champion can secure objectives. You might think Nunu is one of the best champions to secure objectives dealing 1200 true damage, but champions like Evelynn or even Echo later on in the game can kill objectives from 3500 to 3000, 3500 HP to 3000 HP by Evelynn just pressing R Smite, Echo proccing his passive with his E onto the Baron or onto the objective and pressing Smite at the same time. etc. This is kind of hard to learn, but this is also pretty important to learn if you want to become a good jungler, because you want to know if the enemy can outsmite you, because you want to play differently based on if the enemy can outsmite you, right? For example, if you're playing against a new jungle, you do not want to be in basically you do not want to be in a place where both you and the enemy jungler can basically secure it, right? Let's say the enemy jungler is playing like something like Pantheon and is standing right here, right? And I'm standing right here, and the dragon is basically in the middle of us, right? This is basically the worst case scenario for Pantheon, because Pantheon knows that if I'm allowed to walk up to this dragon, let me just get the dragon low a bit. If I'm able to walk up to at this position, there's no way that the enemy Pantheon can kill this dragon, right? But if I'm playing Nunu and I get this dragon below 2400 HP, this Pantheon does not want me to be able to get into his pet, right? Because I'm playing Nunu, this Pantheon should be basically walking up to here to basically try and deny me from ever getting to pit, so I never secure dragon. Or in the opposite scenario, right? If I'm playing Nunu and I see a Pantheon here, I don't care about this Pantheon. This Pantheon can't do much to me. I would just walk up to the objective, press Q, and smite it at the same time, right? And this is where the pecking order really begins to matter. If I was Nunu playing against like this Evelyn, this would be a situation that I would not want to be in, because Evelyn has a higher smite than me. Or if I'm playing Nunu into Echo, basically a similar situations. Now, this doesn't matter most of the time, but it's a useful thing to know that sometimes smite fights are really unwinnable based on the enemy champions, and once you learn the game enough and learn all of the damages of the different junglers, you should basically look to zone the enemy jungler out from being able to Q or use their ability and smite the same camp as you in order to basically secure the objective, right? And yeah, that's about it for smiting. Each champion has different camps they want to smite. Generally, in your first folklore, you want to smite either your first camp if you're starting at buff, or your second camp, but this depends on champions. Like I said, watch the folklore guide for your champion to determine which camps to basically smite. And yeah, one final thing about smite is that you can have a maximum of 2 charges. As a jungler, if you want to be as efficient as possible, you should never have 2 charges of smite, right? If smite is at 2 charges, you're basically wasting cooldown because you're not basically getting a smite charge, right? So ideally, you basically want your smite to either always be at 1 or 0 stacks. You want it to be at 1 stacks if you're just before doing an objective, but you never want it to be at 2 stacks, because that for every second it is at 2 stacks, you're kind of wasting a bit of damage, right? This doesn't matter too much in the late game, but in the early to mid game as junglers, you want to optimize your clear as much as possible. So you basically want to see this cooldown always ticking down a bit, no matter what jungler you're playing. One of the first questions you should be asking yourself as a jungler at the start of every single game is, which lane do you want to path to? Right. Say that a jungler normally starts one side of the map, does their camps in any which order, and goes to the opposite side of the map, right? So if the red side jungler starts top lane, or the blue side jungler starts top lane, he'll most naturally be at bot lane, and he has a timer to influence either bot lane or mid lane. However, you have to make the decision at the beginning of the game, whether you start your top side and play for bot lane, or whether you start for your bot side and play for top lane. There's a few things to note. If you want to start your top side and play for bot lane, you are more likely to be able to get this dragon. And if you and on the opposite side, if you start your bot side and you path for top lane, you're more likely to get the grubs or herald, whatever objectives that spawns there, because you're pathing to the opposite side. As a jungler, you should be asking yourself one question at the beginning of the game, which is, do you want to either arrive to lane faster than the enemy jungler because you have a faster full clear? So for example, if you're playing Zed, which has a 3-minute full clear, against Sejuani, which has a 3 minutes and 20-second full clear, if both of you are pathing down bot lane, you're going to arrive bot lane. You as a Zed player are going to arrive bot lane faster, and you have a window of opportunity to basically gank the lane before the enemy Sejuani can really do anything about it. So there's 2 scenarios. One scenario I'll be talking about, first scenario where you arrive to a lane faster, or you're intending to drop camps to arrive to a lane faster in order to pull a gank off, right? There's a list of priorities that you should have in your mind. I'm going to give a simple overview. I think this is covers around like 80% of the matchups that you should keep in mind about which lane to path to, right? So the first thing is that if both top lane has the ignite summon spell, so both top laners don't have TP, or if both top laners are playing range versus range matchups, for example, if one top laner is playing Quinn and the other top laner is playing Vayne, generally, as a jungler, you want to path up to the lane because double range top laners and are extremely easy to gank because normally their lane is very volatile. They'll trade a lot with each other, and one of them they'll basically be pretty low and pretty easy to gank. The second thing is if both top laners take ignite, then if top laners take ignite, if they die while taking ignite, then they have to walk all the way back to lane, right? Normally when top laners die, it isn't that big of a deal. You as a jungler, for example, if you're a red side jungler and you take out the top lane, you get a nice chunk of gold, 300 gold, and you maybe crash like 3 minions in tower. But the problem is the enemy top lane will just channel TP towards the tower and the minions and be able to basically catch that wave. However, if the top laners elect to take ignite, then they have to walk all the way back and they will miss more minions than top laner that takes teleport. In addition, when top laner takes ignite, that normally indicates they want to kill early game, which indicates more aggression. So if you see any of these two conditions, both your top laners are taking ignite or your top laners are both ranged, you should try path to top. Next, if all four bot laners are ranged people or ranged characters, this normally means the lane is pretty volatile. So if you arrive to bot lane, there's a good chance that either your side will be low or their side will be low or both, and it's a pretty good opportunity to gank. And similarly, another lane that you should basically opt to path to, in priority order, is that if bot lane is playing like a kill lane. It's hard to explain this in full, but there are some champions in League of Legends that are inherently aggressive and really good early on in the game, right? Champions like Draven Pike. If your bot lane is playing Draven Pike, it normally means that any gank you do will be followed up by Pike Hook while Draven is outputting insane amount of damage to whoever you're basically ganking. Or similarly, Blitzcrank can hook in, Kalista can basically kite forever with her auto attacks, etc. If you have a ranged bot lane or 4 ranged bot lane or a kill lane bot and you don't have any of these conditions top, you should be aiming to path bot if you either have a faster full clear or you're willing to drop camps to arrive to the lane faster. Next up, we get to our pretty normal matchups. If one side of the map is ranged and melee, or if the top lane is a range versus melee matchup, then it's again pretty volatile because the range top lane will probably be overextending and they'll be doing a decent amount of trading, not as much as range versus range because the melee will probably build Doran Shield and attempt to like stay healthy, but it's a pretty nice lane to path into. And next we have the normal bot lane matchups. If nothing special on the map is happening and it's just a normal game of League of Legends, you should be just aiming to path bot lane, right? Because if you path bot lane, you get access to the dragon, which spawns faster, and 4 dragons is a very solid win con to win out a League of Legends game. Similarly, tanks versus non-tank top laners are pretty hard to gank because tanks just make the lane stale. So if you have a tank versus non-tank top laner, you shouldn't aim to basically gank it unless the bottom 2 conditions are true. If anybody is playing a mage AD carry in bot lane, the lane is pretty much dead. There's nothing going to be happening in the lane, so you shouldn't aim to path towards it because the mage can just full clear forever and the mage doesn't take any damage. So if somebody's playing a mage bot lane, I will look at the lane and I will try my best not to path into it unless if the one exception, which is being if both top laners are playing tanks. If both top laners are playing tanks, they're probably not going to do much damage to each other, and it's going to be very hard to kill. But yeah, this is a pretty simplified version of what I look for when I decide which lane to path for. And yeah, in the second scenario where you're just trying to full clear and you're not trying to drop camps to gank or your full clear is slower, you should path to whatever lane is winning. Now, this is kind of hard to explain. It requires basically League of Legends experience, but in your head, you should have an idea of what champions are stronger early game, and if you basically do your camp slower than an enemy jungler, you can't basically help them first by ganking out. So your objective in the early game is, since you're not looking to gank, you're aiming to secure the first skull crab after your first basically full clear, right? And in order to secure a full skull crab, it's best to go to a lane that has more prio. Because, for example, if you're a red side jungler and you're here and the enemy jungler is here, if the enemy jungler walks in to contest the skull crab, your bot lane has the opportunity to pinch in jungler and turn this 1v1 into a 3v1 while the enemy bot lane are probably behind, right? In this situation, assuming you have mid prio as well, this jungler is basically screwed and you get the skull crab. So a lot of the time the jungler won't contest you on skull crab and you'll be able to basically get the skull crab. At the beginning of each game, I run this small decision making algorithm in my mind, and yeah, this should determine where you path to. Now we're going to be moving on how to gank. For this section of the video, I'll be giving a simple guide to how to gank. This is an overly simplified version, and not all of these concepts work in higher elos like diamond or above. But for this section, I'll be focusing on the basics of ganking and what you should be thinking about before you gank in any elo from Emerald and below. If you want the full overview and the full detailed explanation of when you should gank or how to gank, I'll be later on in the video. There should be timestamps in the video and in the description. But if you're Emerald and below, this should be the decision making process that you're following before you make a gank. So the first thing before you gank is you have to decide when is a good time to gank, right? And predominantly, there are two simple ways to determine when it's a good time that you should be able to gank, right? The first way is that if you have free time. So, free time in jungle is when there's no camps, no objectives, basically nothing that you can do by just hitting neutral monsters, and your camps aren't spawning anytime soon, so you have time to make plays and do anything you want, right? Some examples of timers of this is that after you finish your first full clear, let's say you're the blue side jungler, you go from blue, grump, blah 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 all the way down here, and let's say that you're a fast full clear jungler, so you finish by 310. So now you're here, now you have full time. Now you have quote unquote free time, so now it's a good opportunity for you to gank because there's some time before the skull crab spawns, which is the next neutral or the next neutral objective that can spawn. So now could be a good time for you to try a gank because you don't lose anything for failing a gank, since this is what we call your free time. You have time to do basically whatever you want. Another example of a timer is that after you finish your first full clear and then you finish your second full clear, after you finish your second full clear, you have quite a decent time of free time. But in this scenario, there is a possibility of doing dragon. So yeah, whenever you have free time, it's a good chance to gank, or a good time to gank. The second time where you should be ganking is if you think that you can get the kill, right? If you do a gank and you get the kill, even if you give up the other side of your jungle, it's actually pretty good for you because of the implications of what the kill does to your laner and to yourself, right? So if you think you can get the kill, you should basically gank a lane. But the hardest part for most junglers is for them to properly analyze when they can get the kill versus wasting their time. So before you gank, based on thinking if you can get the kill, here are some things that you need to consider, that you should be considering before basically ganking lane, right? So let's say that you're the red side jungler and you're ganking top. The first thing that you should be looking for is how close is the enemy towards your tower, right? If your top laner is getting pushed in, the enemy top laner is here, you have a free path to just walk towards here and go behind the enemy top laner. This means the enemy top laner will have to survive your gank by walking all the way through here, and if the enemy top laner is here, it's pretty easy to gank. However, let's say the opposite scenario happens. If the top laner is pushed into here, and you're the red side jungler, you can't just walk in unless if the enemy is, you have to basically tower dive. It's not a gank anymore since the enemy is so close to tower. So you should be looking at how close they are to tower and whether you can get behind them or you can land your CC abilities on them, or any abilities depending on what junglers you play. The second thing you should consider before you gank is if the enemy laner that you're ganking has flash or not. For example, let's say you're the jungler in the same scenario again, you're ganking top lane. If the enemy top laner has flash, they might be able to either flash one of your abilities, like if you're Lee Sin throwing out a Q, Nidalee throwing out a Q, making it much harder to gank, or they might just flash closer to tower so they can basically run or outrun you. Laners without flashes are easier to gank, and you should have some sort of idea if laners have flash. It doesn't have to be like a precise idea. If you gank one, you should basically assume that they have flash, unless if you saw them flash earlier on in the game or somebody else pinned flash for you. Next thing you should be considering is HP bars of both your laner and the enemy laner, right? It's obvious if the enemy laner has a low HP bar, he is going to be much easier to gank. Because you have to land less abilities and you can basically kill them faster. On the other hand, if the enemy laner has a high HP bar or has near full health, it's much harder to gank because you basically have to 100 to O them and spend a lot more damage than you would have normally in order to kill them. Similarly, you should look at the HP bar of yourself and your laner as well. If you're the red side jungler ganking top lane, if both of you are low and the enemy jungler is 100% or enemy top laner is 100% HP, he might just 2v1 you. If your top laner is low, he might not be able to do any damage to the enemy top laner based on the fear that like the enemy top laner will turn around and kill him. So you should be aiming for them to have low HP bars while you guys have high HP bars. Dashes are also an important thing to consider. For this example, I'll use mid lane. If you're trying to gank mid lane because your mid lane is getting pushed in, but the enemy has a long range dash, so let's say LeBlanc, if the enemy has a dash, it makes the lane significantly harder to gank because like Flash, dash is like a kind of a worse version of Flash, right? With the dash, the enemy mid laner, let's say LeBlanc, can W out and basically dodge an ability and move closer to tower. So if the enemy laners have the dashes, it is a bit harder to gank. If the enemy laner doesn't have dashes, it's going to be easier to gank because the only thing they can do is walk away. Finally, the last thing you should consider before ganking is, does the enemy jungler have a possibility of counter ganking me, right? So with the power, so let's say the enemy jungler is on vision bot side somewhere, right? Then as a jungler, you should feel more safe in ganking top because you see the enemy jungler in their bot side, so you know that they cannot counter gank them, right? So if I see the enemy jungler bot, or for example, if I see the enemy jungler top, I would feel a lot more safe in ganking bot lane, knowing that the enemy jungler cannot turn this 3v2 into basically a 3v3 and basically reverse wipe us. However, if I don't have vision of this guy and I don't know where it is, you should be playing more cautious because you don't know if the enemy jungler is capable of counter ganking you or not. So yeah, these are the 5 main factors that you should be considering before you gank. And if most of these factors look good, then you should go ahead with a gank. If they have a lot of dashes, they have a lot of flashes, they're high HP bar, or they're close to tower, you probably shouldn't gank, and you probably should consider doing something else like recalling or doing an objective. Either way, this is the simple guide to ganking. Once again, I'll be doing a more detailed and deep dive into when to gank, but if you're Emerald and below as a jungler, these are the basics you need to know. Since you've watched this far in the video, you probably like some of my content. So just a quick plug, I'm live on Twitch most days where I'm streaming solo queue. I normally stream high-low solo queue, and if you want to see me show off the jungle skills I'm explaining in this video, feel free to watch me on Twitch and give me a follow. And be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. It helps me a lot and it really motivates me to create more of these videos. So yeah, quick plug done. Now, the next topic I want to talk about is jungle pathing. Although you know where you're pathing throughout the course of the entire game, it is valuable to you to figure out where the enemy jungle is pathing so you can generally know where the enemy jungler is at all times. If you know where the enemy jungler is at all times, you can help pin off their ganks, you can gank without the fear of getting counter ganked, or you can more effectively contest scuttles, knowing that if you're pathing into the same scuttle crab, you know that there might be a fight here, so you can ping your laners to help, or you can get priority to laners, whatever. It is pretty important to it is pretty valuable. I wouldn't say it's absolutely necessary, but it's pretty valuable to get an idea where the enemy jungler is starting. So in this video, I'm gonna just show off a few things. This Udyr, this is a common level 1 technique you can do. if you purchase War level 1, this Udyr will walk into my jungle. I'm playing the Nunu, and basically place a ward here. Now this ward does two things, right? If I wasn't here, it would show when I would be on Raptor camp, and he'll be able to get an idea of when of where I'm pathing. But since he does see me here, he knows I have to start red Raptors or Krugs, but most likely red, because I don't have enough time to basically go to my bot side and clear bot to top, because it takes around like 18 seconds to walk over here, and I'll be just wasting some free time if I do it. So that's the first thing I want to show. This Udyr did a good job of figuring out where I'm starting. And similarly on my team, you can do this yourself, but sometimes your laners will place a ward over here. And now I exactly know what Udyr's path is, because later on in the game, at around, if we speed the game up a bit, see around now, pause, this is my vision. I can see Udyr does 12 camps, or has 12 CS. Each jungle camp gives exact around 4 CS, so I know basically I know that Udyr has cleared all of his top camps, most likely blue Gromp wolves, because that's how most junglers clear. And I know that Udyr will be looking to clear all 3 of his bottom camps, and potentially look to do a gank on here, a gank on my bot lane, or a gank, or trying to take the skull crab. And with this information, I can in this game, I decided to gank bot. Hold on, I'll just replay the play. I decided to gank bot because they're low on their tower. They're both 1 HP, so this is an example of a situation where it is tower diveable. I do die in the end for this, but yeah, just I get 2 kills, commit 2 kills, and I'm dead, right? However, since I knew this Udyr is bot side, I know this Udyr will contest the bot lane skull crab. But also I know that since I just got 2 kills, I have a lot more items, and I have a lot more prio on mid lane, or on bot lane, or sorry, I have a lot more prio on mid lane to be able to get the skull crab. So that's exactly what I do. I immediately path out base, and I meet this Udyr at the skull crab. Now I can't read the future, like I'm not able to like time travel in the future, but if you see the enemy jungler is pathing down, there's a high likelihood they'll be here. And what happens next is I manage to get the skull crab away from him because of my mid prio. And yeah, I just managed to secure the skull crab for free, and this is what jungle tracking basically helps you to do. It helps you to know where the enemy jungler is at all time. And in this scenario, when I press tab, I can also see level 24 CS means that he's cleared 6 camps, so he's full cleared up, down. And what he's most likely going to do is do another full clear. So if I go full vision, I think that's exactly what he does. He probably just bases after, or he goes for top skull first, and then he just full clears back top down. He does top scuttle. I guess he goes for invade, but either way, you get my point. It is pretty, you get to know a lot about the enemy jungler based on jungle tracking early game. So yeah, whenever you have a ward in their jungle, or whenever you can press tab and see how much CS they have, you can kind of tell where the enemy jungler is, and this information is pretty useful in the early game of League of Legends. Invading as a jungler oftentimes can be deceptive in how good it actually is. A lot of junglers will think that if you steal 1 camp on invade, that is actually good for you. But in reality, if you only invade and steal 1 camp, it's actually pretty bad for you. If you manage to invade and steal 2 camps, it'll be alright. And if you steal 3 camps, then that's the point where invading starts becoming good. Alternatively, if you get a kill on the enemy jungle, that's also when invading becomes good. But one common mistake that a lot of junglers think about invading is that they think that stealing 1 camp or stealing 2 camps is good. Well, in reality, stealing one, if you're invading to only steal 1 camp, it's actually pretty much a waste of your time due to how long it takes to invade. And if you're invading to steal 2 camps, then it's an even trade most of the time, but you're not going to be super ahead. And let me show you why. So in this example, I'm going to show off a game where I play Maokai jungle. This is pretty simple. I'm playing against Shaco, which is one of the best champions to invade me. And I do a simple Raptors clear. And this Shaco does a trick where I think he does this Raptors level 1 and then invades my red buff. There's a lot of specific invading tricks for each champions, but as you can see here, Shaco shows up at my Krugs at 1 minute 55, meaning that he probably did the Raptors. He probably boxed up his Raptors and invaded me here. And in this spot, the main thing you have to think about as a jungler being invaded is to not panic and secure anything that you can, right? If Shaco gets Krugs and red, it'll be okay for him. But if Shaco, or if he gets a kill on me, it'll be good for him. But if I manage to walk away with this Krug camp, that means that Shaco will have to do red buff, and he has to walk all the way back to his camps in order to do the next camps. The reason why invading for one camp isn't good is because it's very inefficient pathing, right? Let's say that you're doing a normal full clear, or you're doing a normal full clear, if you're doing Gromp, or if you're doing blue Gromp, Wolves, Raptors, red, Krugs, you only at most have to walk about 5 seconds between each camp, making it pretty efficient with your movement. However, like in this case, if Shaco kills me here, or if Shaco doesn't manage to kill me here and I manage to get the Krugs, then he can do my red buff to get the one camp I was talking about, but then he has to walk all the way back to his blue buff. And this walk takes around 10 seconds. Meanwhile, I'll be able to do my top side and I'll be able to basically contest him later on in the game. And that's exactly what happens. Now, as a person being invaded, you have to be mindful of if you win the 1v1 or not, right? Maokai, early game, I have no spells up. I win auto attack battle against Shaco anyways, so you just have to back off when you're getting invaded as a champion who doesn't fight well level 1. So that's exactly what I did. I backed off, I waited for Shaco to basically walk back, and now we're fighting for the Krug camp, right? I popped my pot immediately because I think this might be a long fight. Side note here, I think Shaco has Ignite, so Shaco has a bit more damage. But Shaco's basically out of ability since he used both his Q and E on me. So then I walk back, hit the ward. What's important here is that I Q Smite the Krugs, similarly how you can use a ability and Smite in order to secure a major objectives. You can also use your ability and a Smite in situations where you're getting invaded in order to secure the small camps as well, right? So I get the Krugs. I'm still weaker than Shaco. If I just go walk up and all attack him, nothing will happen. And even though this is a challenger game, you can see that none of your laners really care about your jungler, you as a jungler being invaded. Unless if your laners have astronomical prio, they're not going to care you're going to get invaded. So invades are mostly going to be broken down in one-on-one situations. Which is why you should only invade on champions that are good at invading, just like Shaco, Bel'Veth, Kang, all of the champions I mentioned before. Play the clip further. Shaco now does my blue, or now tries to do my red. I get a bit greedy here, and I didn't think Shaco would come back. But unfortunately, it's alright. I can't walk through my jungle anymore, and my HP bar is kind of low. And yeah, you'll notice that after this invade, you can see why this is a bad invade. Shaco does get one camp from me, but in the end, he's equal CS from me. Because what I'll be able to do is, by the time I recall and go back to my top side, he'll be finished my red buff and clearing my bot side. However, like, it's not good for him because I will mess around with its top side later on in the game. As you can see it here, I think I do this, or I get both Scub, or I guess this game goes a bit haywire, but you can generally see like the farm will still be kind of even though he gets a kill on my top lane. I managed to get double scuttle because Shaco invaded me, and yeah. So in theory, if you're invading an enemy jungler, you have to be certain that you're winning the 1v1, and you have to be confident that you're going to get either 2 camps or a kill. If you don't think you're going to get 2 camps or a kill, at least, then it's not that good to invade, and you probably shouldn't invade. However, if you think you can get 2 camps on a kill, and then you should invade. On the other hand, if you're getting invaded, you have to almost always treat it as a one-on-one, unless if you know your teammates are coming. And even if your teammates are coming, most likely they'll be kind of late to the fight. But you want to, most early game junglers don't have a very good way of killing you before like level 6 without their ultimate. So most of the time when you're getting invaded, you just have to calm down, walk away, and think about the next move you're making. Because if you know that their invade's not going to be good unless if they steal 3 camps, the threat of getting invaded is not that big. In this section, I'll be giving a quick guide on the jungle objectives around the map. So first of all, I'm going to be starting out with the dragons. Now, whenever you kill a dragon, you get a small buff to you and your entire team, depending on what dragon it is. You don't have to be worried too much about these small buffs, as in the course of the game, it's usually not consequential at all. The main reason why you want to get these dragons is to get the fourth dragon, which gives you the dragon souls. Now the Dragon Souls are pretty good in this game currently. I'd say they give a significant stat buff to everybody that gets it. And if you get Dragon Soul, I think you have like an 85 to 9% chance, depending on what soul it is, to win the game. So if you can get all 4 dragons every single game, it's really good. However, some souls are worse than others. In my opinion, if you get Cloud Soul, it's an instant win since the Cloud Soul is just so broken. Hextech Soul is the second best soul in the game because the slow that it grants you on hit is pretty good and it changes to other people as well. Mountain, Inferno, and Ocean are on its own tier. It's pretty equivalent to how good they are. Ocean Dragon is better if you're getting poked out. Inferno Dragon is good if you are poking them out. And Mountain Drake is just a bit more HP in general. And finally, the Chemtech Soul is the worst soul by far. It isn't useless, but this soul is pretty bad, and compared to the rest of the souls, it doesn't really do much. Yeah, so when you start attacking the dragon, he'll knock you back just like this. If you can, you want to kind of avoid this knockback so you can basically do something else with your time instead of just getting knocked back by the dragon. So for example, if I'm playing Master Yi, what you want to do is you want to alpha strike this so you don't waste time staying in the pit. Or if you're playing another champion, you can also just walk out of the pit to do this dragon. The dragon's aggro reach is pretty long. You can common attack that a lot of people do is a lot of people would drag the dragon out of this pit. This allows it so that if the enemy is like standing over the wall here, it's harder for them to like steal it because like they would have to jump over, and if an enemy takes a blast point from here to here, and the dragon's like just out of range, then it'll be hard for them to steal it because they can't just smite the dragon. They have to walk up and smite and then go back and then dash back over the wall, which is a lot more complicated than just hitting the blast plant, smiting the dragon, and going back over. So whenever you have the opportunity, you want to leash the dragon out as far as possible because it makes taking the dragon a bit safer to do, and it doesn't take a long time. Next objective I want to talk about is the grubs. Now, the grubs in League of Legends are pretty alright. I would say the first rotation of grubs is just worth as much as the first dragon. So don't be worried if you're trading first grubs for first dragon because they are basically the same. Now the unique thing about grubs is that if you kill one of the grubs, you'll notice the other grub is at 1100 HP, so it'll heal up basically once you kill one of them. Similarly to how I guess old Krugs worked, or old I remember there's one camp that worked like that. But yeah, if you're playing a melee, if you're playing a champion that melee relies on single target DPS, you want to kill one of them at a time. However, if you're playing something that has a lot of AoE like Maokai or Kang, or maybe some other junglers, you want to kill all 3 of them at the same time since you don't care about the healing too much and you want to maximize the damage on your abilities instead. So if you kill 2 of these grubs, it's enough for you to claim the feat reward after you leave the camp for a long time. So that's why you'll see some junglers kill only 2 of the grubs. But killing the 3rd one also gives a nice bonus since it allows you to spawn the little Void Mite whenever you hit a tower. So now that I have 3 grubs, I can go up to the tower and it will spawn me 1 Void Mite. Now this Void Mite is useful because you can notice it tanks a tower shot in place of a minion, so it's much easier for you to kill the tower. And the buff makes it so that I do additional true damage to towers, right? I auto attack it once and I get basically additional 96 damage to the tower, which is pretty useful to take in towers early game, especially if you get grubs before the turrets fall. So yeah, grubs are a good objective. However, they don't scale as well as dragons. If you're taking first grubs, you have more of an advantage in early middle game, but if the enemy takes 4 dragons to 3 because you took the first grubs, then obviously it's not that good. Next up, we have the Rift Herald. Rift Herald, unironically, is not even that good of an objective to take currently. If you kill Rift Herald, you get a small amount of gold. I think it's 200. and you get the Rift Herald buff, which you can use to charge into a tower, taking around like 40, or I think it's like 50-60% of HP or something like that. Whenever you're taking the Rift Herald, you want to be sure that you're hitting the eye as many times as possible, and you're weaving as many auto attacks as you possibly can, because the more auto attacks you do, the faster the eye will respawn. So for example, if I just do nothing, I'm not auto attacking this Rift Herald, this eye will take longer to spawn than if I was constantly auto attacking the Rift Herald every second. So yeah, you want to auto attack this Rift Herald as much as you can. And yeah, I don't think there's much to say about this Rift Herald. You can drag this Rift Herald out similarly to Dragon if you're kind of afraid to take it, and basically it is a nice chunk of gold. However, it is kind of not that useful in my opinion. There are some nice tricks that you can do with it. If I show you off here, there is one trick about Rift Herald, is that you can control the steering a lot. So whenever you kill a tower, the Rift Herald, let me just get some items so I can kill towers faster. I don't even know what I'm buying. That gold. So yeah, just gonna kill the tower really fast to basically show off the resaying mechanics. Okay, tower's low. I'm gonna kill this tower. Mainly if you use Rift Herald, you want to crash it on more than one tower if possible. So a neat trick that you can do with Rift Herald is I'm going to get this tower low, and after you kill this mid tower, you can do a drift up to top tower with the same Rift Herald, right? This works for bot to mid and mid to top as well, or top to mid and vice versa. So with the Rift Herald, you can get in, you can charge, and then I'm going to wait for the Rift Herald to walk a bit, then I'm going to go into the Rift Herald, and I can charge it all the way up to top tower. I think you can do both T2 and T1. If this tower was available, you can kill this tower, but or you can hit this tower if it wasn't invulnerable. You can do the same thing to this tower. So if you're using Rift Herald, it's always nice to get the charges of it. Another niche use of Rift Herald is that you can actually use it to escape fights sometimes. Let me just spawn another Rift Herald again. It's a bit clunky in how this works, and it's not good all the time, but it's still a nice interaction that you can pull off with the Rift Herald. Is that if you ever find yourself like trying to escape a fight, Rift Herald is actually a good tool that you can use to basically get out. So imagine if I was fighting somebody and imagine if I was just fighting somebody and let's say I pretend like I'm low HP. What you can do is that if they're far enough away from you, you can drop Rift Herald. You can try to stall it out a bit by walking away, and then you can get back into Rift Herald in order to go away, since they can't hit you in the Rift Herald unless if they deal like all the tank damage in the Rift Herald, which almost every champion, even if there's 5 people hitting it, is a bit hard for them to do. Moving on to the major objectives in the game, these objectives are much more powerful than the ones I mentioned earlier. The first one that I want to show off is the Otacon. This Otacon, it gives you basically blood roses, which gives a very significant amount of XP and adaptive force to this entire team. It has 2 main attacks. It shoots out these balls, or 3 basic attacks. It shoots out these balls. It sometimes damages you in a circle, and yeah, the main thing when you're taking this objective is you want to be hitting it in melee range, or you don't want to be like this. You don't want to get hit by multiple procs of the swirling ability because it can damage you a lot. Instead, when the swirling ability comes, if you're ranged, you want to basically only get hit by 1. But if you're melee, you want to stay in the middle so you don't get hit by as much of it as possible. And when the orbs come, you want to like you want to basically walk away from it as soon as possible, like in a circle. Notice how all 3 of these orbs don't hit. Now, the one thing about taking Otacon is that this objective is a bit dangerous to take, not because it does that much damage to you, like I'm getting kind of destroyed, but that's because I'm not like auto-attacking as normal. It's because of this debuff it gives you, which is called Frail and Unworthy. This unit's armor and magic resist are reduced by Otacon's attacks. So right now I have 62 magic resist and 54 armor. However, if I were to not be hitting this Otacon, I would have 50 more armor and MR. And to keep in mind, 50 armor and MR is worth like a cloth armor is worth 300 gold, so 50 armor in itself is worth like 1k gold, and 50 MR is worth like another slight portion of that as well. So whenever you're fighting this objective, it's best not to like take this 5v5 unless if you have a huge lead, because if the enemy tries to fight you 5v5 and your entire team has this debuff, then you're basically kind of screwed, because you're fighting down a very significant amount of gold, right? Let's say you were ahead like 1,000. Let's say that you're ahead like 1,000 gold of the enemy jungler. Instead of being ahead 1,000 gold, you'd be behind a significant amount of gold compared to enemy jungler because you're taking this debuff. So Otacon is an objective that you can normally take 5v4. It isn't as dangerous as Baron, but ideally you do not want to flip 5v5 scenarios with this Otacon. And yeah, just gonna show off what it looks like when you kill it. You get these blood roses around the map, and you get this spiritual purification, which is a nice buff. It basically gives you a mini Lissandra passive. This buff is kind of good in teamfights, especially if you can get one kill, because it slows enemies 60% for 1.5 seconds. So if the enemy is team fighting and one of them dies, then it's like pretty bad for the rest of the people as well, because that means they're gonna get kind of screwed. So yeah, TLDR Otacon, pretty, yeah. So next up, once I kill all of these grubbies that spawn for some reason, I'm going to be talking about Baron. Similarly to Otacon, it gives you Void Corruption, which is similar to the Otacon buff, but this applies way slower than the Baron. As for killing the Baron, there's multiple different forms, but generally there isn't too much that you have to look forward to. Sometimes there's these tentacles and you want to walk away from them in order to not get stunned up as soon as possible. And another thing is that if you're standing in the back of the pit, the Baron would do like these attacks onto you, which does a slightly more damage than if you're on the front of the pit. One difference with Otacon and Baron is that this Baron buff will stack I think forever. I actually don't know how far it stacks, but it will stack. It will continuously stack and it's slower. So similarly, you do not want to fight this 5v5. Honestly, you wouldn't even want to fight this 4v5 sometimes, or 5v4 sometimes, unless if you have a big lead, right? If you want to do Otacon or Baron, your most successful play is to get a pick beforehand, and then you can do the actual objective itself. So yeah, as you can see, the stack is still stacking up. Some champions can do Baron faster than the others, but Baron is a champion that most junglers are unable to solo kill. Every other camp that I've talked about before now are normally solo killable, but Baron is one camp that isn't able to be solo killed, so you have to pin your teammates before doing this camp. And whenever you kill Baron, you get this buff, which is called Hand of Baron, Empowered Recall. Your recall goes down to 4 seconds. You have a bit more AD and AP, and you get the Baron Siege minions, as well as I think 300 gold per person on your team. So it is a pretty game-winning objective if you can get it, but honestly, sometimes the enemy team can stall out huge Baron pushes by just chilling under tower. Normally, this buff doesn't last the whole game. It only lasts for like, I think 3 minutes or 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So you want to get, when you get Baron, you basically want to take all of the outer turrets on the map out first. So like you want this tower to be dead, this tower to be dead, these two towers to be dead. And then if you have time left, you want to start breaking the inhibs with like a 4-1 or 1-3-1 push, depending on what type of game style you want to play. But it isn't as game winning. It is pretty important, but it isn't as game winning as the next objective. I love how Practice Tool is just bugged out. The next objective I'm going to be showing off is actually, will just win you the game on the spot, like in 90% of the time, which is the Elder Dragon. Now, contrary to the Otacon and the Baron, this dragon is actually pretty harmless. It doesn't do much damage to you, and it doesn't have any MR resistances or threat any armor and MR. So this is the one objective that you can take a 5v5 on, because it doesn't nerf your team if you're standing in the pit for too long. Similarly to other dragons, if you're playing this side and you know the enemy jungler is here, you want to drag the camp out as far as possible to get this dragon. And whenever you're playing a solo queue game, just keep in mind that if you get this Elder Dragon, you basically win the game on the spot. So getting this, as long as there's 5 people up, Whenever Elder Dragon spawns, you want to rush to this objective with all 4 members of the enemy team, because if the enemy team gives up Elder, normally they're not pretty smart and they'll just lose the game. The reason why Elder is so important is because it gives you this buff aspect of the Dragon, which gives you 75 damage, or it gives you a bit of burn over 3 seconds, but the most important part is gives 20% execute. So it's basically like the end, you do like 25% more damage to the enemies as long as this Dragon buff is up, because if the enemies fall below 20% HP, they're just gonna die. Whenever you have Elder, the simplest way to end this game is just to pin mid lane, or if Baron's up, you should go to Baron right after, because Baron Elder is a guaranteed win if you just go mid lane. But similarly, you could just go mid lane and run down mid lane if you ever get this Elder buff, because it's so OP. And basically any fight you take outside of literally diving both Nexus towers is fine, but at the same time, they can't take any fights into you. So prioritize this objective when you can. It's the most strongest objective in the game, and if you get it, you basically just win on the spot. Vision as a jungler is often a heavily misunderstood concept. Now, the key part about playing jungle is that although you're not a support in that you have a dedicated item to basically get infinite vision, you are basically the second in line to who's responsible for vision. So you have the opportunity to roam the entire map and not just stick within your own lane. Generally, on your first buy, it is fine to go either Stealth Ward or Oracle Lens. You want to go Oracle Lens if you want to gank more, and if you go Stealth Ward, you're mainly trying to farm and contest Skull Crabs a bit more. As for the early game, there's not that much to talk about vision. It is pretty useful to know some of the common vision spots that you should be doing. For example, if I am playing Briar, I clear all my camps, wolves all the way down. I'm at the Skull Crab. I would have basically 2 charges, and if I arrive the Skull Crab in time, I would want to ward this bush, and I would want to ward this bush. This makes it so that I can see if the enemy jungler is walking in to my camps or walking into this Skull Crab range, just so that I have like advanced information in order to basically kill them before. Similarly, if you're here, you can, or let's say you're playing the opposite side. Let's say if I'm playing red side, one ward you can try to get is this ward to see if the enemy jungler try and go for Tribush, and after you kill the Skull Crab, a pretty common ward is you want to go up here, you want to ward this so that you can see the enemy jungler on the second rotation. So that's about it for your early game stealth wards. As for Oracle wards, you basically want to sweep in the highly contested positions. So for example, if I'm doing Red Raptors and Gromp, one common place that I want to sweep is around here, because it's pretty common the enemy top laner will drop a ward in any of these areas. If they ward, you can if you have a good enough attention span, you pay attention to all of the lanes during the laning phase, you can kind of see when the enemy laners go out of vision of the lane, and that's normally the timers that they ward. But if they never go out of vision, then they don't have any timers to ward, so you don't have to worry about the wards. Similarly, mid laners can often ward this bush over here or this bush, and on the opposite side as well, this bush, this bush. And if you're doing red side, Red Raptors, Gromp, this Tribush is very common to be warded, so this is a good area to sweep. Overall, you want to sweep in the areas where the enemies have the most chance to get vision early game. In the later game as a jungler, after your first or second base, you always want to switch to Oracle Lens, because with Oracle Lens, you can basically walk into the enemy jungle without fear of being seen. Because if I'm walking into enemy jungle and let's say there's a ward here and I'm just doing this camp all the time, it's pretty easy for the enemy mid laner to see this and collapse on me, or the enemy top laner to do the same thing if I'm on vision, and the enemy jungler will be sprinting right at me in order to kill me. However, if I sweep this beforehand, they won't know that I'm on this camp, so they won't have that much of a chance to do the same thing unless the enemy jungler just so happens to be here. But either way, it mitigates the risk. Similarly, after 15 minutes in game as a jungler, you want to start buying control wards, right? It's fine to finish an item and not buy a control ward, but whenever you have gold for a control ward after like 15 minutes in game, whenever in base, you want to buy them. This because it's because jungle is a low economy role by default. But even if you are solo carrying, these wards are really helpful in setting up these objectives on the map. If you want to, for example, if you are setting up for your third dragon of the game, right? Let's say you have mid prio and bot prio, you want to ward this bush so that if the enemy tries to walk into here and place a ward, their ward will get negated by this pink bush, and you can pink ward and you can kill them, and they can they don't know if you're in this bush or not. So if they're just face checking while this control ward's in here, you can basically kill them by catching them out. And similarly, the second most important place to ward is right around here. Let me buy another control ward. This is because this is the second entrance that the enemy can have into your bait, into the dragon pit. And so they would normally, the enemy either has to face check here or here if they're coming from mid side. And unless you're playing very high elo solo queue, you want to basically set up the vision here. Later on in this video, I'll be talking about how to properly set up vision, no matter the elo you're playing. But if you're, again, diamond and below, these two ward spots are really good for setting up these objectives. Once you have these two wards, ideally your support will ward the other one, then you're perfectly safe to do this dragon, because the enemy will have a deep fear of face checking into here, because you guys can be right here and basically kill the enemy if they face check into you. If you see them face checking, you can go up and go up and just kill them in the meantime. But these two wards are very important for vision whenever you're doing any objectives. Similarly, for Baron Pit, there is a bit of a different ward. I would say the main thing that changes from Baron Pit is that when you're doing Baron, you're kind of more scared that they'll steal, and Baron is more commitment than Dragon. So this is this is one of the warding spots you want for your pink wards to be. This is the most important. Same concept. It's very hard for them to face check this bush, and if they walk through here, then they're pretty exposed because they can get flanked from either somebody staying here or somebody staying from here, and they can't get vision here. And the second most important place to drop a ward is in the pit. This is so that if the enemy does a trinket or a blue ward, they'll only have vision of the pit for around 3 seconds before they have to basically do another blue trinket or another ward in order to check that you're not doing Baron. So these two wards are pretty important for these two buffs. You mainly want to set them up around Baron or around dragons. For grubs and rift, it doesn't matter that much, and this matters more for the third and fourth dragons of the game after 15 minutes. As for doing Otacon, there's only really one good place for a ward. If the Otacon is top lane, you want to ward this bush. If you're blue side, and if you're the red side, you kind of just want to ward up here. It's kind of an awkward place to drop a ward, but it helps see what the enemy is coming in. Normally this would be a support dropping a control ward, so it's not really your job, but yeah. Similarly for this Otacon, this side is a bush here and a bush or a ward here as well in order to block off the try. Yeah. If you're really ahead in a game and you have access to basically their entire jungle, there are a few more ward spots that you can do. Basically any bush in the jungle works as a valid ward spot for your control wards, since your control wards are not invisible. If you put a control ward in any one of these 4 bushes, if you're trying to invade red side, it's pretty good. You can even put up here if you really have full control, but depending on the level of control you have, you want to put either a ward here, a ward here, a ward here, or a ward here. And similarly for this side, control ward in bushes if you have control of the objective, or if you won't have control of the side. So a control ward here, a control ward, I guess control wards here aren't that common, but control ward here and a control ward here is the most common for this side of the map. If you have less control, control ward here also works, and or a control ward in try also works for you. By the way, the main point I want to hammer away is that after 15 minutes, you need to buy control wards as jungle. It's pretty non-negotiable no matter what jungler you're playing, because it helps out the team so much with setting up vision for objectives. And it also helps you secure camps and get a lot of kills that you wouldn't get anywhere otherwise, right? So yeah. Some champions have special vision hacks. Like if you're playing Nico jungle for some reason, you can run W in the bush, or if you're playing Maokai jungle, you can, instead of getting control wards, you can E the bush. But they are pretty uncommon, so I don't think you have to worry about that too much. But either way, that's a basic vision, guys, of where you want to place your control wards as jungle and how you want to use your sweepers. One other thing to note is that the sweepers is also pretty. You kind of want to do, if you're trying to sneak dragon, a very useful tool is to like sweep dragon pit before you go over or after you go over. So if you're trying to sneak dragon like this, hitting this oracle lens right as you go over the pit helps you basically ensure that they don't have any wards that can basically steal dragon away from you. I feel pretty unsafe if I don't do the sweep, because whenever that, if the enemies ever drop out of vision, then it could mean that they're just killing you on this dragon, which basically throws your life away and the entire kill away. But yeah, TLDR, buy control wards, swap to sweepers after 15 minutes, and you should be good for vision. In this section, I'll be talking about how you should be playing jungle when you're ahead, and how you should be playing jungle when you're behind in the mid to late game of the League of Legends. So for all of these examples here, I'm going to be assuming I'm the red side jungler. So the first major thing you want to accomplish when you're playing League of Legends from ahead is that you want to take these dragons whenever it's up. 4 dragons into Elder is one of the safest and most consistent win cons in League of Legends, and if you find yourself securing Soul most games, it's pretty good. So whenever a dragon is up, you and your team should be looking to set up dragon by basically pushing out mid, pushing out bot, and go on dragon whenever it's up. Unlike Baron and Archon, you can do dragons without getting a kill beforehand. So it's pretty simple to win the game of League of Legends if the enemy is not doing much, to constantly take dragons as it constantly applies pressure to the enemy team. If let's say you get, however, if the enemy team does throw, which happens a lot when the enemy team is behind, let's say you get a kill on an overextending jungler in the river and he's just off the map, then this is a good time to look for Oddcon whenever it's spawning, or you can look for Baron as a group of 5 people if the enemy jungler or if the enemy mid, top, ADC are off the map. Whenever you get a kill, you should be looking for these major objectives, as this is your opportunity to basically break open the goldie lead even more and get these major objectives for free. However, there's a lot of times in the jungle where there's not a lot going on, right? We normally see bot support swap here, mid lane swaps here, top lane goes top. These two are interchangeable. Sometimes there isn't much you can do because dragons will not always be up, since it's only once every 5 minutes, and sometimes the enemy jungler doesn't want to give you a kill. In times like these, there are 3 main things that you want to do as a jungler when you're ahead in order to basically maximize your chances of winning the game. The first thing you want to get is mid prio, right? If you're really strong, you want to help your mid. If the mid lane state is like this is kind of illegal for them to be up there, even if the enemy jungler is hovering. It's because you're stronger 33. You want to basically come mid to push the enemy ADC and support back into their kind of base, right? Into their base area or near their tier 2 tower, in order to basically get control of the bot side jungle, right? Once you get the mid prio, then you should do the same thing with your side laners, right? If you hover here, you want to push, ideally you want to push the lane state to something like this, and top lane doesn't really matter in this scenario. But if you're in lane state like this means that this side of the map is basically yours to take. If any camps respawn here, you can go ahead and take it, and this basically generates a gold lead, because the enemy jungler is completely lost on what he can do. He can go topside, but if he goes topside, you can potentially dive here if he tries to take your topside. Most likely, the enemy jungler just has to sit here and watch you take their camps, and realize that they don't have mid lane prio and they don't have side lane prio, so they can't do anything. If the enemy jungler does go here, you just simply dive bot with here, and the enemy mid laner instead, you take this tier 2 tower, you go for tier 3. Meanwhile, the enemy jungler can take his top side and maybe some of your top side, but it doesn't really matter because their whole base is exploding. The most common mistake junglers make when they're ahead is that they feel like they have to do something, right? But League of Legends isn't really a game where you have to do something in order to maintain a lead. You can just passively maintain a lead and go back to these dragons, right? In a lot of professional level games, you'll see a lot of souls be taken because people know they don't have to throw, and they can. When you're ahead, you are not. Most of the time, you're not on a huge timer to get stuff done, and you can take all 4 dragons and then Elder, and then end the game with that because Dragon Soul is pretty good. Elder is pretty good. If you're dying while ahead is the worst mistake that you can possibly do because you're just throwing the game for no reason. You're stronger if you follow these 3 simple steps of getting mid lane prio, side lane prio, and then taking camps whenever it's up or taking the dragon on repeat. You'll naturally win the game as long as, or you'll have the high chance to win the game, assuming your teammates don't throw. For the silent trial, you can also do the same thing on the opposite side. You basically want to stick to a side that has the objective spawning or the side that is the strongest. This is what we call strong side in the mid to late game of the game. Now, when you're behind as a jungler, it's a completely different story, right? If you're behind on jungler, there's no really good way to play it, but your best bet is to be on the opposite side if you're the jungler, right? Although I did mention the red side, if let's say I swap spots and I'm the blue side jungler, if the enemy red side jungler is taking my bot camps, I do have to maybe try to make a play here and pray the enemy jungle messes up this dive here or doesn't know how to dive, because you're not stronger than enemy jungler when you're behind, and you can't fight them. So you want to avoid as much interaction as you can, right? As possible. Another tip is that you want to take your camps on respawn, right? If the enemy jungler doesn't do all of this and instead is taking his camps, if you just match full clears, you're not really losing anything because you're taking the same amount of camps as the enemy. And if you get to if the enemy jungler isn't very good and isn't at your camps when it's respawning, you can basically stem the bleeding by going even, as long as you can. Now, when you're behind this jungle, it sucks, right? There isn't much you can do unless if you're that strong. You can go try to gank either mid, top, or or bot lane, but you can't really do anything. One small play that you can do is that if any time that the enemy team is over focused on dragon and they don't have vision on top side, you can kind of ping your team to trade dragon for baron and pray to God the enemy team doesn't know you're on baron so you can secure a sneaky baron. But overall, playing from behind sucks. If you get there, there's not much you can do, and playing from behind is a skill that is extremely basically hard to learn. You basically want to force stuff where the enemy jungler is not, and although it shouldn't work, you just have to pray that it works so you can regain the lead and regain the control. Jungle control is very important here, and since League of Legends is a team-based game, you do really want priority in your lanes, and if you do not have priority, this game completely sucks to play. So yeah, try to be ahead wherever possible, or even, right? Even side of the game is a bit more even. You have more flexibility to take fights, and you get to show off your mechanics a bit more. But just try not to blow up the game by yourself, right? If you're 2k gold behind the enemy, if you're like 1.5k gold behind the enemy jungler can pull this off and basically screws over the save of the game. So you want to stay the jungler that's ahead, and if you're the jungler that's ahead, do all of this stuff, and as long as you don't die and take all the dragons, you'll be cruising to east, or you'll be able to win the majority of your games from this lead. There are some simple things you need to know about champion select as a jungler, but normally it isn't that much, and it really depends on what you play. Normally, as a jungler, you mainly want to swap your first pick at every single champion select because jungle matchups don't matter as much as you think, and even if you get placed in a really bad matchup, it doesn't matter that much in my opinion, even if it's like the worst possible matchup. Like if you're playing let's say Karthus versus Bel'Veth and you're still scared of being bait all the time, there's a lot of things you can do to basically avoid the threat of being baited. So whenever possible, I'll always switch to basically picking first for my team, and by picking first by your team, you can pick the same 3 champions ideally every game that you can play. However, there is some times where you can't play a certain type of champion because of the draft you're facing, or the draft that your team is doing, right? So let's say that I'm playing jungle, and let's say that my top laner is hovering Cannon, my mid laner is hovering Malzahar, my sub ADC is hovering like a mage, any mage like Syndra, and my support is hovering like any engaged tank like Nihilus, right? If your teammates are hovering this probably means that this is what they're intending to play, and they can't really play anything else. If you see this situation, you are basically locked out from playing any AP jungles, because if you pick an AP jungle, the enemy team, one of the person on the enemy team will just play like any tank champion. Like they'll play like I don't even know. They'll play Renekton and build Hex Drinker first item into Force of Nature, or even worse, they'll play an actual tank like Scion and build Force of Nature into Rukurin, and then nobody on your team is able to kill them if you do this draft. So if your entire team is hovering one type of damage, you need to go to the other type of damage, and this is why it's recommended in your champion pool to have both AP and AD type of champions in case of drafts like this. Now, there's a second way that you can adapt to draft, but it is a bit harder to do and requires mastery of a lot of champions in the game. If you do manage to see more of the enemy champions in this game, so let's say the enemy champion picks Kha'Zix, Scion, what's another invisible champion? Let's say they pick Akali, right? Or where is Akali? Then this is actually a really good Lisa angle if you're picking fourth here, or if you're picking fourth here, and let's say you're Diana here, or this is your ADC picking Draven. If the draft goes something like this, let's say they pick ADC too. If the draft goes, okay, this I'm not that used to drafting, but you get my point. If the draft goes something like this and you're the fourth pick on the team, then it's acceptable that you pick Lee Sin here. But if you're limited by your champion pool, and for 99% of people you are, you should just first pick, right? Because it's not that good. But if you have specific counter matchups, jungle matchups don't matter that much. But this is a double whammy because it hits both Akali and Kha'Zix. So it is a spot to pick Lee Sin. But I would not recommend this type of style unless if you know how to play a wide variety of champions in League of Legends, which is pretty hard to do. Finally, the last tip on drafting, it is sometimes useful to pick the opposite side. It is pretty detrimental to pick comps with all damage or low damage. For example, let's say that your team is hovering, let's say, what's a low damage mid laner? Galio. Your team is hovering Galio mid. Your top laner is playing a tank like Asante. Your ADC is playing something with not that much damage like Ezreal, and your support is playing some random pick like, let's say, Alistar. Your team is pretty dang tanky. You want to aim to pick champions. If your team is hovering all of these 4 champions, you want to aim to pick something in your champion pool that is a bit more high damage. So champions like Karthus would be good if you play it. If I can find Karthus. Karthus would be good because you want damage. Or like even Nefiri. Basically swishy champions that deal a lot of damage are good in these spots. Kindred also works. But you do not want to be picking full AP. You do not want to be picking another tank here. It would be really bad if you just decide to lock in Rammus, because that means your team will be lost in draft because you do no damage. Similarly, if your team is really trying to pick all damage, or your team is really trigger happy and picking like only champions that deal damage, Irelia top, your mid laner is looking to pick like, I don't know, what deals a lot of damage mid lane? Azir. Mid lane, your ADC is looking to pick Draven, and your support is picking like Pyke. You want to, in this slot, you want to play a tank jungler, because if you don't play a tank, okay, let's say something even more egregious than Irelia, because low-key Irelia is kind of tanky. What top laner does absolutely no damage? Yeah, if you're ever facing a draft like this, it is pretty useful to pick tank champions jungle. So you want to look to pick like tanker bruisers, right? Maokai would kind of work. Maokai jungle would be okay. Rammus, if it's good and you play it. Sejuani would be really good here. Skarner, whoever's in meta and is good. But basically, if your team is hovering for heavy damage champions, you want to pick champions that do low. You want to pick frontline instead. If your team is hovering all tanks, you want to pick something that does damage. If your teammates are hovering all AP, you want to pick something that does 80 damage. And if your team is picking all AD, you want to pick something that does AP damage. Now, there's a common problem among junglers in which that I would play jungle in like any elo below masters, and I would see the most ridiculous builds. So this is a segment to teach you how to find out the correct build for whatever champion you're playing. So the first website I'm going to mention is lawanalytics.com. In my opinion, this is the best stats website for you to get insight of what you should be building. And for example, if you are playing, let's say, Xin Zhao jungle, you can scroll down here and you can see that most people go combination of Thunder Sky Black Cleaver. So Thunder Sky Black Cleaver is a build that you should be going, or Thunder Sky Titanic Hydra. But either way, this is one way to figure out what builds you should be going. You shouldn't really be going any of the builds like that are only played 28 games. It's kind of hard for you to innovate as a jungle player on your own champion unless if you're at the apex tier. I'm talking about challenger and above, and it's normally best to just follow the hive mind and do what everybody else does. However, if this method doesn't appeal to you, there's also another way that you can see what people are building. The top players on champion normally knows what they're building, so there's a champion called OneTricks.gg, which basically compiles the data of every top player on their champion. So if I just search up Xin Zhao build and go to rankings, and now I can look at the top people on the world, you can see that these are runes you should be building. Sunder's or Eclipse Thunder Sky is a viable build path if you're playing Xin Zhao, or Eclipse Black Cleaver, right? Normally you can follow these if you want, since these players are able to hit challenger with it. I think that it is comparable to just going the default build of Thunder Sky Black Cleaver, but you should be mainly using these three sources of information to figure out what you should be building and what you should be picking as your runes all game, right? So for the runes, you can also find out Law Analytics. You can see Conquer is the most played. However, Phase Rush does have some games, but it's a bit niche. But as you can see, this Phase Rush, or oh wait, I'm looking at Hecarim for this guy. If you look at Xin Zhao, you'll see that Conquer is the rune page you want to go, so Conquer here as well. And this is how you find out what items and runes you should be taking every game. And whenever I'm playing a new champion or learning a new champion, I usually go to Law Analytics and then go to OneTricks.gg, just search up the champion I want to pick and basically select the best build from there. If it works to get a player all the way up to challenger, it probably will work well for you as well. So now that I've covered all of the basics of jungling, I'll be moving on to a more advanced section of the videos where I'm going to be talking about concepts that mainly apply to higher elo players. If you watch everything before, you're probably good to go up to masters, or diamond and masters, but for this section, I'll be talking about some more advanced concepts that will help you fight or will help you win a lot more, but it's a bit too complicated for lower elo players to understand. The first concept is how to play fights slowly, right? In League of Legends, there's a lot of what's it called? There's a lot of damage in every champion's kits that rely heavily on their abilities. Only some champions like AD carries and auto attack based champions like Velvet or like Master Yi rely solely on their auto attacks. But for a large part of jungle champions rely on their abilities to do damage. So, when playing a team fight or any skirmish, it is sometimes worth it to play the fight quote unquote slowly in order for your abilities to be up in order to maximize your damage to the opponent. Here's one example I have of this in a fight that I took while playing Maokai in a challenger game, I think recently. So, context, I'm walking up to do grubs. I see Yone appear top lane. I know, obviously, at this point, I am 1-0-0. The only item I have is Ionian Boots, and Yone is higher level than me. If I just run at him right now, he's probably beating me in the 1v1. So, I'm electing not to just go up towards him. I also have a hunch that Shaco is here because Yone is not completely dumb. He knows that if he's here without Shaco, he's just going to get collapsed on by Jace. So I know there's somebody else here. So that's why I don't just go fully in onto him. I'm taking the fight slowly. I'm planting a sapling in the bush, and I'm just waiting to see the options while I wait for my Jace to come. So now we're fighting this grubs. Shaco appears, tries to assassinate me, presses ignite, and ignites me. So now I know they're looking for a kill on me. So I need to not get killed, because if I get killed and the fight plays out, then it's just a lost 2v2, because if I die instantly, even if they use all the cooldowns on me, they'll just reset their abilities and go on to Jace. So I anticipate, I react to Yone Q3, which would have killed me, and did a flash while casting my R at the same time. Shaco gets rooted, but as you can see, Shaco's 1 HP. But what I mean by playing the fight slowly is that a lot of people will go and tunnel vision onto the Shaco kill. However, if you greed for the Shaco kill, Yone is just going to auto attack you like 3 times. Auto Q, auto, and auto Q, auto W, auto, and then I'm probably dead with the E pullback. So there's no need to walk into the Shaco. I don't do damage with my abilities, I only have a W, so I'm waiting for my cooldowns before I fight again. So that's why I walk away. I let Jace finish off the kill. Jace gets around Shaco. It happens. But it's all good because Yone gets pulled too far back. But now I get to... now Jace finishes up the kill onto Shaco because Yone has to take his E back. But in this situation, if I played the fights like how a lot of League of Legends players do, I would have been dead because I played the fights too fast. But instead, in League of Legends, a lot of the time it's really useful to participate in these skirmishes while waiting for your abilities to be up in order to basically cast more of your abilities. Once extending this fight a bit more, you can see that we're going on to Yone. I could walk up and auto attack Yone here, but I am afraid of the Orianna that's like beyond the wall, and I know that my Qs are not going to do a significant damage to him. And even if I Q him, there's a chance that he can. There's a chance he gets knocked over the wall with my Q. So I'm not trying to walk up to him until I have my Q cooldown ready in order to kill him. Now I see Orianna, even though my Q cooldown is coming up and I can just walk forward and press Q, I know that I probably would die to Yone because Yone would be too close to me and he'll be able to get all attacks off, and Orianna might even have R to pull me in the center. So again, I'm playing the fight slowly and walking back. Unfortunately, my Jace does die, but because I play the fight slowly and Yone is completely out of cooldowns and conditions, that's why I can get the kill easily. And that's how you basically play the fight slowly. Now, if I were to play the fight faster, the fight will probably still might have been won, but probably not as cleanly as it was. Probably it would be a 2 for 2 because Jace would probably still die and I would die and I would not be able to get grubs. But this shows how important it is to play fight slowly. I have another example later on in this game of playing 1v1 slowly instead. So in this situation, my Jace is pretty low fighting the Yone. He's about to get killed, I believe. And I'm trying to clean up his basically afterwards. So I walk behind Yone. I press R in an attempt to save him, but unfortunately Yone gets the E auto W off, so he doesn't die. But now I have all my abilities. I'm not auto attack trading with him because I know Yone is better than me as an auto attack champion. So I'm just trying to use my rotation of spells. I don't walk up and auto attack him like most people do. Instead, I run away, wait for my cooldowns to be up again before you fight him even more. That's like a key principle of fighting slowly as jungle champions, right? I'm now waiting for my W to be up because he has the lethal tempo stacks. If I just walk up and Q, it might miss, and also a Q and kill, and he might be able to just kill me. So I walk slowly. So now I know that he has Q3. The problem is if I instantly press W, Yone can Q3 out of my, or Yone can eat the W, then Q3 out at the same time, then stunning me up and also landing W afterwards, maybe all attacking me to death. So I wait for him to instead cast his Q3 first before channeling my W towards Yone in order to basically ensure that I don't get hit by his Q3, Q him in the wrong direction, but it's okay because I can eat the bush with my last cooldown, and since he is low enough without W, that's why I can finally come up and all attack him. But the point I'm trying to get across is that a lot of League of Legends junglers play fights too fast. There's a lot of situations where you need to play fights slower in order to preserve your life, because if you're alive, you can keep throwing abilities and spells, right? There's no point going in just for the reason of, oh, I want to do slightly more damage to them. You have to think about how much more damage you're actually going to do to them, and you have to basically value you living in a team fight more than you currently do for the vast majority of League of Legends players. Now, I'm not saying that you need to go 0 deaths every game. There's some games where you probably should die 1 or 2 times in order to trade in a team fight, but most of the time, if you're a League of Legends jungler, you should be aiming for less than 4 or 5 deaths a game, and the way you do that is by making safe plays like this. Instead of going all out, fight to the death, You can play the fight slowly and wait for your cooldowns to be up before you re-engage. Having a support matchup that is unfavorable to you because the enemy support keeps roaming on your plays while your support does nothing in the same lane, it's not actually as bad as people thought. In this game, it's a challenging game I recently played on my main account, and this Pyke has been roaming the entire game. He has been roaming top, mid, getting kills and ganks elsewhere. I'm unable to safely enter my top side of the game sometimes because of this Pyke roam. Whenever this happens, there's actually a solution to this that not a lot of junglers understand. If the enemy support has been frequently roaming out of lane, the one solution to this play is to basically dive bot lane, right? So because I know Pyke has been roaming, you have to be playing bot side of the map. I have to be looking to punish Kog'Maw, as much as possible because this Pyke has been roaming, right? Let me get back to the same place. So just for context, right here, yep, here we are. This Pyke has been roaming, so I go bot lane. I find an isolated Kog'Maw by himself, and since Sona is not roaming and playing bot side, this is a free kill onto this Kog'Maw because his support basically abandoned him, right? Although Pyke does get pressure mid and top, whenever you're a jungler facing these types of roaming supports, you need to pressure balling as much as possible, right? Kog'Maw just died, enemy team finishes Void Grubs, so knowing this information, I have to play bot side because I know the enemy Pyke is somewhere in my top side jungle, or somewhere basically not with this Kog'Maw, right? And this allows me to get the mid camp. I see that Pyke is actually ganking mid, so this means that Kog'Maw will have an extremely hard time walking back to lane, because if Kog'Maw walks back to lane, we are 3 full HP people ready to dive him, and Kog'Maw is particularly vulnerable to getting dives. So knowing this and seeing how Pyke is just stuck mid lane not helping his Kog'Maw, I basically pinned that I need to dive this Kog'Maw if I see him on the map. And I know that I can't really go topside to help my team out, because if I go topside, I'm just going to be alone. My support isn't going to roam. Because of the support lane matchup, Pyke is going to obviously be better than roaming than Sona, even though Sona is better late game in team fights. So, simple. Pyke is roaming mid. You have to punish with a play on bot lane, and I managed to tower dive mid. Or tower dive bot. But this shows that if the enemy support is roaming, and you can easily punish it by punishing the enemy ADC for basically playing a 2v1. The enemy support gives up his ADC's ability to live in exchange for basically your ability to go for a top side, and that normally is a good trade for you because you're denying more from the enemy ADC than this Pyke is denying from you. I mentioned earlier in the video that there will be an advanced ganking guide that's typically aimed at people in higher elo, and in this section I'll be going over some of the more intricate details you have to think about before you gank if you want to know effectively when to gank. So let's start off with some basic assumptions that you need to make about solo queue. You can make different assumptions than me, but I make these assumptions in order to have a simplistic look of what your chance of winning any given solo queue game is. So it's pretty obvious. If your team is ahead in gold and EXP, you have a higher chance of winning. So one of the main goals as a jungler is to bring your team forward in net gold and EXP, right? Now, this might be a bit misleading considering some champions skill better than the others, like Kayle and Caston hitting level 16 is a huge spike for them. But for the sake of simplicity and not thinking too much, I'm going to make this assumption just for the purposes of this guide. Now, it's hard to exactly quantify what a level lead actually translates to and how much value it brings in League of Legends. So I've just put at 500 gold per level. I feel like that's a reasonable assumption that I work around. And similarly, you have to have aside from having gold and EXP, the other thing that matters to winning a game is how many objectives you have. So the objectives that really matter is soul, which I think if you have an entire 4 dragon soul, it's around 4k gold value. If you take the first 3 grubs, it's worth 500 gold. And the one thing I didn't put here is Anakan, which I think I spelled it right, which I would value at around, I would say 1,500 gold. And similarly with Baron, Baron itself, the buff is not that valuable, but you already get the inherent gold from killing it, right? I guess similarly with Otacon, you get the inherent EXP here, so it's valued a bit less. I would say without the EXP, it would only be valued at half for the buff. But with Baron buff, is useful for its um gold and EXP that gives when you kill it. You get like 300 gold per player and a bunch of EXP when you kill it, but also grants you a buff. I would value that buff at around like 1.5k. 1,250 gold in my mind. So if you now know the state of a League of Legends game and you add up the gold, the EXP, and then the objectives, you can tell what chance you have to win a League of Legends game with this simple formula. Now, how does this relate to ganking? Well, one part about ganking is that it doesn't always work out the way you expect, right? League of Legends is a very dynamic game with 900 players in a game, and sometimes your teammates can int, sometimes the opponents can int, sometimes a bunch of different things can happen. But what really matters most for winning games consistently in solo queue is predicting the chance that everything happens, right? For example, if you were to look at if I were to look at a potential gank opportunity, I would have a little thought in my mind about what the chance that gank works is. Now, this chance is hard to describe, but I sort of described it earlier in my previous section relating to flashes, how far up they are, their HP pool. But overall, I could spend like hours and hours analyzing every specific lane scenario and what chance it is of getting gank off. But the way you learn this is mainly by ganking lanes yourself and seeing what works and doesn't. Once you have in your mind the chance that a gank works or fails, the next step is to assess what you get when the gank works and what happens if the gank fails, right? Obviously, if a gank works, there's a lot of things you can get, right? You can get plates if your lane is able to crash, or your team gets plates if your team is able to crash a wave in tower and start taking the plates. Similarly, they can get turret gold if they're about to kill the turret. And also, you can deny waves to the enemy team depending on how many waves are shoved in, right? If there's like if it's a tower dive and there's three waves shoved in a tower, if you kill the enemy under tower, then they lose all of those 3 waves of gold and some of the EXP, right? So they lose a lot for getting punished. However, on the flip side, there's also things that you can lose by even ganking correctly, right? You could get your camp stolen on the other side of your map if you gank one side and the enemy jungler's on the other side and the enemy jungler sees that your camps are up, right? They can proceed to go then steal your camps to basically get a gold and EXP lead themselves, even if the gank works. Similarly, objectives, right? If you're ganking bot and grubs are up, they can go secure the top lane grubs because they see that you're ganking bot lane because you're revealing that information to them on the map. And this ties in with potential cross map plays. Not only can they get the objective, but they can also potentially dive your top laner if your top laner is low. But basically what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of potential factors that can happen each time you gank, and you have to think about basically the value of what happens if you successfully orchestrate a gank. On the flip side, if you fail a gank, there's a lot of things that can happen. You can die, which gives your gold away to opponent. You and your laners can die, which also gives gold away to your opponents. Your opponents can again do all of these things. They can they can take objectives, they can steal camps, they can make cross map plays. They can do a lot if your gank specifically fails. So whenever you fail a gank, basically you gain gold, and you gain a gold and or whenever you make a gank that's successful, you gain a gold lead for your team, but whenever you make a gank that's not successful, you lose gold for your team, right? So before you start ganking, you have to think about what chance the gank works. Now this is an extremely hard skill to teach, but after playing more and more jungle in League of Legends, you'll eventually be able to figure out what ganks are actually good and what ganks are bad. Next off, you have to compare what you get if the gank works, right? For this example, I say this 1.5k figure to figure could be that you're ganking bot lane, which has 2 kills, which gives you 600 gold, or 600 gold, and then you crash around 3 waves, which gets you, I think a wave is around 200 gold worth of value. So 1200 gold, and you get two plates, which is or you get 2 plates, which is 240 gold, and that brings you somewhere around the 1.5k marks. So if you make this gank work, you get 1,500 gold, and you can potentially trade camps with the enemy jungler. However, if this gank fails, you can die, and the enemy jungler can take your top side, which 2 camps is worth around 200 gold, and your death is around 300 gold. So you can lose around 500 gold if this gank fails, right? Even though this gank has a lower chance of working, a lot of players will not take this gank because they think, oh, there's only a 40% chance this gank works. And probably is not worth it, right, to take this gank. However, if you abide by the concept of ganking with positive expected value, you want to take this gank because the chance of the gank working gets you a net of 600 gold, because 0.54 times 1500 minus the chance of this gank failing, which is 60%, times how much you lose, 500, which is equal to 600 minus 300 equals 300 gold. So on average, if you make this gank, this hypothetical gank, which has a 40% chance to work, on average, you'll get 300 gold by the end of this gank, right? Some games, or more games than not, your gank will fail and you lose 500 gold, but 500 gold isn't that much compared to the 1.5k gold that you're potentially gaining if the gank works. Similarly, on the other side, if there's a gank that has a high chance of a higher chance of working, but doesn't reward much gold, it could be detrimental to make the gank, even though if it works more times than not, right? Let's say that you're just ganking someone and the only thing you can get is a kill. Then you basically only get 300 gold you only get the 300 gold if the gank works, right? If you can't get anything else, if you can't get a crash wave, if you can't get plates, if you can't get any camps, then you're only getting 300 gold. However, if you die, you're going to die, you're going to get invaded, and the enemy has the potential to basically gank the other side of your map, killing one person, then you're losing 700 gold if the gank fails. Applying this expected value formula, you can see that on average, let's just fix this, minus 0.6 times 500. I hope I did my math right. I'm not in the mood to do more math. But anyways, 0.6 times 300 minus 0.4 times 700. Chance of this gank working is 60%, so there's a 60% chance you gain 300 gold, and the chance of this gank failing is 40% chance, so there's a 40% chance where you lose that much gold. So then on average, you're getting 180 gold if this gank works. However, if this gank fails, you're losing 280 gold, which means the expected value of this play is negative 100 gold. So as you can see here, even if a gank has a high chance of working, if the payoff isn't relative to the potential loss, then you shouldn't make the gank even if it works in more games than not. Now, of course, there's a lot to be said about making more plays when you're behind, or making riskier plays when you're behind, and making safer plays when you're ahead. But honestly, that is a level of thinking that's even too much for me. And yes, although I agree that like sometimes you want to make safer plays when you're ahead, these ganks work a lot better when you're ahead because it's just so much easier to gank if you have more gold in them. So rarely do I consider having a lead or having a disadvantage to be a factor in determining when a gank works. So in the previous guide, in the previous section, I simplified and said basically gank when you think it works, or gank when you're pretty sure that works. But in the advanced ganking guide, and what works for a lot of high-elo players, is that you need to not only ganks where it perfectly works is a great time to gank because you're always winning expected value. However, there are some times where you're not sure that a gank will work, but if the expected value of the gank is higher than is positive, then you should go and look to take the gank, because that will on average increase your chance of winning the game, even if the gank is basically a coin flip and fails sometimes. So yeah, you don't really have to think about all of this if you don't have to. I know a lot of full clears that have gone into Challenger by just full clearing all game. But if you do want to climb to the top of League of Legends, or if you do want to think about more competitive League of Legends scenarios, you do have to think about these you do have to think about ganking more than only making a guaranteed play, right? League of Legends is a pretty dynamic game, and if you only make safe guaranteed plays, it's pretty hard to win consistently, right? If you're just an average laner, you're most likely to be hard sucked, and similarly, if you're an average jungler, you're probably more likely to be hard sucked. However, if you can think like this, then you're more likely to fit into the, I guess, top 100 of League of Legends solo queue by thinking about the chances that ganks work and fail. In this section, I'll be talking about some small miscellaneous tips that aren't big enough to have your own section, but does help a decent amount when you're jungling. The first one I want to talk about is using F keys. Now, I'm going to use an exaggerated jungle example for this, but if you're clearing the jungle, or if you can see Faker in this clip just walking back to lane, it is actually pretty useful to F keys to your lanes to see what they're doing. Although you might not have to do it as fast as him, like this is pretty useful if you're just clearing the jungle and you have nothing to do, because then you can you can see the state of the lane better than if you were to only view it on the minimap. The second that I want to talk about is Otacon flowers. Now, a lot of people view Otacon flower as something that they should pick up, but not as something too important. However, a lot of people don't know how important these flowers actually are. This is the official League of Legends wiki on Otacon flowers, and you can see that at the first 10 flowers, if you pick up the first and ninth flower, if you have the ninth flower, you will get a total of 207.5 gold value in AP and 217.88 gold value in AD for yourself, just for yourself, not even counting the XP, right? The Otacon flowers also gets experience, but I won't count this. But this is kind of insane, right? Just for yourself, if you pick up 9 flowers, you're getting around 400 gold of value. But for your whole team, that's 5 players. If you pick up 10 flowers, or if you pick up 9 flowers, you get 2,000 gold in stat values, not even including the amount of EXP that you get. What this basically means is that on the first to ninth flower, these flowers are very important in getting your team some bonus AD and AP that could be worth a lot. And you probably should pick it up because according to these calculations, if around 10 flowers are worth 200 gold or 2,000 gold, then one flower is worth 200 gold plus the XP that you get, which is hard to quantify, from the first to ninth stack. So if you see a bundle of three flowers in the early game, that's worth almost 600 gold. I don't. That's 2 kills. It's actually crazy how important these are and how little people value them because it doesn't show how much. It doesn't really show how much you feel for yourself. Similarly, however, these flowers become less important as the game goes on, and you can see once you hit 35 flowers, it's no longer that valuable. You get around 16 gold times 5, which is around 80 gold per player. 80 gold for your team if you hit one of these flowers, but triplets are still pretty useful. However, these flowers disappear when Archon is taken, so you might not find something in the late game. In addition to being pretty good for your team, you're also denying these flowers for the enemy team. Just like how taking a camp denies taking a camp and enemy jungler not only gives you gold but denies the enemy gold. This is sort of a double whammy in itself, and it's what makes Otacon and Spirit Petals so valuable for your team. Next I want to talk about is catch up EXP. Not a lot of junglers know how this works, but basically if you're more than 1.1 level behind the game's average champion level upon killing a large monster, you get bonus EXP for killing a monster. So basically if you're behind in the game compared to the average level in the game and the monster respawns and is 2 levels higher than you kill it, you get some bonus EXP. Now this might not seem that matters too much, but this basically makes it so that that's very hard to punish junglers by getting a very big CS lead, because the moment the enemy jungler goes down a lot of levels, they can get a lot of comeback EXP to be basically you're almost always at most 1 or 2 levels up on the enemy jungler throughout the early game because of this comeback bonus. Similarly, if you're behind, you should be thinking about this comeback bonus. I sometimes look at camps to see if I'm getting the EXP from this comeback bonus. but it is a pretty useful tool to know when you're behind, knowing that you can kind of cope a bit by saying that you're going to get some bonus EXP from these camps that the enemy jungler won't get because you're so far behind. Finally, the last thing that a lot of junglers don't do, or a lot of people, I guess in League of Legends don't do in general, is chain CC. Now, this is an extreme example of this, but as you can see, chain CC is when enemy champion is CC'd, it's obviously easier to land more abilities onto them, right? So in this example, we can see Morgana R goes off, and the person waits for the CC to be ending before he layers his next part of CC. This makes it so the enemy is stuck on the same target or stuck in place for a longer period of time, and you should be really saving CC abilities to when the enemy is just getting out of their last CC abilities. So for example, if your Nautilus lands a hook and auto attacks you before you throw out your stun or root, you should wait for Nautilus's auto attack route to basically completely finish in order to maximize the amount of time that they're basically stunned in one place, right? Similarly, this guy's chaining Morgana Q with Everfrost, and yeah, chain CC is pretty important, as there are some kills that you won't be able to get if you can't chain CC. There's some times that you can't actually chain CC because of the team fight situations, but if you're going for picks like 2v1 or 30v1 or picks where you're winning, you should be looking to set up these chain CCs. In this last section, I'll be explaining some of the tips or some of the methods I use in extremely high elo. Now, unless if you're in Challenger or top of Challenger, this is pretty much useless for you. But I thought it would be fun to basically share a glimpse of how the game evolves when you're playing against the same people every game. Now, the first thing I want to mention is name gap. In Challenger, you're just able to tell how good a player is by the name, right? For example, if I go look at some of the people who are lower on in Challenger, I can see people that I sometimes play with, right? I know that let's just pull one up. Shacomium is Shaco one trick that isn't that good at the game because he's low. He is good at the game because he's Challenger, but compared to like my standard play, he's not that good. Similarly, I know that Gemma is a solid Poppy one trick top lane that plays tanks and basically plays safe. And you get to know about each single player on the ladder the more you play with them. Like there's a lot of things I can say about every player, but there are some players that are more worth playing for than others. For example, if I look at the top laners on the server, we have Viper on this account, Whippo, and Zamudo. And basically, if you have one of these players on your team top lane, you're supposed to pass to them more because of how impactful they are to the game, right? They're on the enemy team, it's a good idea to shut them down because all three of these players are pretty kind of easy to gank. And if they're on your team, that at the same time you want to play for them because they will win you the game single handedly if left up to their own devices, right? Another person like this would be Superman #Yona. I think this is General Sniper. You basically want to look out for people who you think will win the game for you. As for ADCs, ADC and supports are a bit less important, but some of the mid lanes are cracked, right? C9 Loki, mid lane for C9. I know Fly Quad plays. If you see these people, you need to play, or it's a good idea to play for them because you can win the game off of them just by playing for them. Similarly, one tactic that some people use but I don't use is morning queue. Normally, if you queue up at the tower time of like I would say 8 p.m. EST to like 1 a.m., you'll get a lot of lobbies with pro players. Compared to if you queue up sometime random like 8 a.m. in the morning, you're just gonna get diamond players on your team. Now, some players are better playing with diamond players on your team, and some players are better playing with these pro lobbies. Personally, I think I am more of a better player if I only have diamond people on my team because I feel like I'm more easily able to abuse diamond players than top challenger players. But I'm too lazy to wake up early in the morning, and LP isn't worth changing my sleep schedule just to play with worse players. I enjoy playing with higher elo players. That's why I normally queue up when there's a decent amount of higher elo people playing. Another tactic people use specifically against me and other people is that if you know that a player has one good champion, it's a pretty good idea to ban it out, right? As the case with Viper, you should ban Riven out if you just play against Viper and he played Riven and destroyed you. Against Shacopium, if you know he's in queue, or if there's a Shaco hover, you probably should just ban Shaco out because, like, you know, he cannot play anything other than Shaco. So if he plays anything other than Shaco, he's just gonna lose. Same thing with Wen with Udyr. It's not necessarily about them being that good at champion. It's that them playing other champions is much worse than them playing their OTPs, right? Same thing with Quant. If you see Urgot, if you know if you really want OP, and you see that last game you have Quant on, or last game you have Quant on your team or the enemy team, and nobody's hovering Urgot in the lobby, you should ban it out if you want OP. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the habits of certain players. Once you play with players enough, you'll tend to know what players play too aggressively to a point where it's gankable, and what players generally play in lane safer. In my experience, talked about this already, but Viper plays top lane very aggressively, so it's an easier target for me to gank. Whipple is more of a safe player. Zamudo is a complete psychopath, and it's always a good gank. But there are some players that play safe. Like Samikin is a mid laner that's he used to be easy to gank, but now it's like medium or he used to be easy to gank, but now he's changed to medium difficulty to gank. Let me think of a player who's hard to gank. Sushi as an ADC is extremely hard to gank because he plays a more respectful playstyle than enemy laners. So yeah, you should be thinking about that. Also, it also works with invading as well. As I mentioned, that Shacopium guy always tends to invade you because that's what his champion does. What else? If you let me see if I recognize any names on the ladder. Solar Baka's pretty easy to gank because he plays Gameplank and he doesn't really respect jungle. Uh, what else? A lot of the top junglers don't normally invade that much. It's more of like the GM players that tend to invade you over and over again, which is not the best strategy. But hey, I mean, they're doing what they want to do. Yeah, maybe Ammonia Boy is an Eve 1 trick who will always invade your second camp. And because I played against him so much times and he's always invaded my second camp, I know to change up my clear to basically counteract the strategy. But yeah, these are some tips for high challenger players. I know it might not apply to many people, but this is just a fun little glimpse of the elevated techniques in League of Legends. If you play solo queue for long enough, get to the top of the ladder, and play with a lot of higher rated players, and learn the game in a different way. I've played Amarillo from around silver to challenger, and I truly believe that top challenger is the most fun place to be because the level of gameplay gets to levels where it's a lot more complicated, especially if you're in lobbies with like nine other or with like average LP 1500 LP, or everybody in the lobby is in the top 100. These games feel so much different compared to your normal games of League of Legends. But anyways, I think that's the end for me for this guide. This is pretty long. I know I plugged before, but subscribe if you haven't, and I'm live on Twitch. If you have any questions about anything in this guide or just want to talk to me, there's a Discord link to my in the description where I'll happily answer some questions about my guide. But yeah, thanks for watching. I probably will make a new video soon, but honestly, this video is so long. I'm so tired after making this video. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.